The wind howled like a living thing around the ancient storm tower, tearing through its jagged edges and rattling the iron-bound windows. Rain lashed against the stones, as if trying to claw its way inside. From a distance, the tower appeared abandoned, a relic of a forgotten age, but those who ventured near spoke of whispers, shadowed movements glimpsed through the cracks in the masonry, and an almost palpable tension that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Mara's boots squelched against the wet cobblestones as she approached the looming structure. The letter she had received 2 days ago had been brief and cryptic: "Come alone. Midnight. Storm Tower. You must see for yourself." No signature, no hint of sender. But the handwriting, sharp and deliberate, had awakened something in her, a mix of curiosity and dread that refused to be ignored. As she reached the massive arched doorway, Mara hesitated. The heavy oak doors were partially ajar, revealing darkness within. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the tower's jagged silhouette and casting long, writhing shadows that danced across the walls. Something inside seemed to stir in response to the storm, and her pulse quickened. She could feel the anticipation, almost like an electric current along her spine. Stepping inside, the air was immediately cooler, tinged with the scent of wet stone and iron. The tower's interior was narrow and winding, a spiral staircase curling upward like a serpent. With only the faint glow of lightning filtering through high windows, she made her way up cautiously, each step echoing ominously. The wind seemed to follow her, whistling through the cracks and making the shadows sway and flicker as if they were alive. At the top of the staircase, a heavy door barred her passage. Mara's hand trembled slightly as she pushed it open. Inside, the room was vast and empty, save for a single chair facing a tall, arched window. Lightning flashed, illuminating a figure seated there, a silhouette against the storm, impossibly still. Her breath caught. "Who's there?" she demanded, though her voice sounded weak against the roar of the storm. The figure rose slowly, turning to reveal a man whose presence seemed to dominate the room. His eyes, dark and intense, met hers with a calculated curiosity. "Mara," he said, his voice low and hypnotic, "I've been waiting for you." A shiver ran down her spine. There was something magnetic about him, something that pulled at the edges of her caution and reason. She should have turned and run, but the storm seemed to hold her in place, and his gaze rooted her to the spot. "You don't know me," she said, though her voice wavered. "I know more than you realize," he replied, stepping closer. The shadows seemed to cling to him, wrapping around his form like a living cloak. "The tower has secrets, and so do you. Tonight, they intersect." Mara's heart raced. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet a strange thrill surged through her veins. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and utterly forbidden. The storm outside raged on, hammering the tower as if trying to break through, and in that moment, the storm inside her mirrored the storm outside, wild, unpredictable, and electric. Lightning illuminated a sudden movement, a shadow darting along the far wall. She spun, but there was nothing there. Or perhaps, it was always there, waiting, watching. "You feel it too," he murmured, his hand brushing against hers. The touch was fleeting, yet it sent a jolt of heat straight to her core. The tower remembers. And it chooses. Mara swallowed hard, her body taut with tension, desire, and fear. The air crackled with energy, as if the storm itself had fused with the anticipation between them. Here, in this tower, every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind a whispered promise or a warning. "I don't know if I should," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. He leaned closer, his lips just inches from hers. Then let the shadows guide you. Outside, thunder rolled, shaking the tower's foundations. Inside, Mara felt the first tremors of a storm that was far more intimate, far more consuming than the one outside. And as the lightning flashed one final time, it illuminated a decision she couldn't ignore. The storm raged outside, but inside the top chamber of the storm tower, a different kind of tempest had taken hold. Mara's pulse still pounded, a mixture of fear, fascination, and something deeper she didn't fully understand. The man before her, tall, dark, and magnetic, remained close, yet not threatening. His presence was almost hypnotic, like a shadow that wrapped around her senses, pulling her into its gravity. "Who are you?" she finally demanded, forcing herself to speak despite the quickening of her heartbeat. The wind shrieked through the tower's cracks, shaking the old stones as if testing her resolve. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that promised secrets but revealed none. "I am someone who watches, someone who waits," he said. His voice was velvet and steel, weaving through the storm like a dangerous melody. "This tower, it doesn't open its doors lightly. And neither do I." Mara swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet her curiosity, that stubborn flicker that had always led her into trouble, refused to relent. "Why me?" she asked. "Why now?" He took a deliberate step closer, closing the space between them. "Because you can see what others cannot," he murmured. "You feel the shadows." Her breath caught at his words. She had always sensed things, strange movements, whispers in empty rooms, shadows that seemed to linger longer than they should, but she had dismissed them as imagination. Now, confronted with the reality of the tower, those subtle sensations felt undeniable, tangible, alive. "You know about the shadows," she whispered. "I do," he said, his eyes gleaming. "And they know you. They've been waiting for someone like you to arrive." A shiver ran through her, part fear, part something she refused to name. The room seemed to darken, the storm outside casting sharper shadows that crawled along the walls, stretching and twisting in impossible shapes. Mara's gaze darted to the far corner, where a faint, flickering movement caught her attention. A shadow darker than the rest slid along the stone floor, following her every motion. "You see it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It always watches. And it chooses carefully whom to reveal itself to." Mara's mind raced, yet a strange exhilaration tinged her fear. The sensation of being watched, of the tower acknowledging her presence, was intoxicating. And then there was him, his nearness, the way the air seemed to hum around him, the subtle heat that brushed her skin whenever he moved. "Are they dangerous?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dangerous, yes, but only if you fear them." He stepped even closer, until the warmth of his body pressed against her side. The storm outside seemed to pale in comparison to the storm building inside her chest. Fear clouds judgment. Desire sharpens it. Mara's pulse surged. The intensity of the moment made her dizzy, her thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. And yet, beneath the fear, there was an undeniable pull, a magnetic force drawing her closer to him, to the unknown waiting in the shadows. He extended his hand slowly, deliberately. "Come with me. There are things you must see, things that will change the way you understand this place, and yourself." Her fingers trembled as she reached for his hand, the contact electric. The shadows around them seemed to lean in, alive with anticipation. The tower groaned as another gust of wind rattled its foundations, echoing through the stone corridors like a warning or an invitation. He led her through a narrow passage she hadn't noticed before, the walls slick with rain and moss. Each step seemed to awaken the tower, the shadows stretching and twisting in response to their presence. Mara felt as if the tower itself were alive, breathing with a rhythm that matched her own. At last, they arrived at a chamber that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Crystals embedded in the walls shimmered, casting fractured rainbows across the stone floor. Shadows twisted in the corners, moving with a strange intelligence. Mara's eyes widened, taking in the surreal, almost hypnotic scene. "They are the keepers," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the hum of the room. "The watchers of the tower. They exist between light and darkness, revealing truths and hiding lies. Few have ever seen them and fewer still have endured the experience unscathed." Mara felt her knees weaken, the air thick with anticipation, tension, and something else, something dangerous, thrilling, and undeniably intimate. The shadows seemed to respond to her presence, curling toward her, brushing against her skin like invisible fingers. She shivered, a mix of fear and desire racing through her veins. "You're ready," he murmured, stepping behind her and letting his hands hover near her shoulders. "But once you step fully into the shadows, there's no turning back." Her heartbeat thundered in her chest. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the storm tower, a different storm had begun, one of seduction, danger, and secrets that whispered promises she couldn't resist. And as the shadows swirled around her, Mara realized with a thrill she hadn't anticipated, she was no longer just an observer. She was part of the tower now, part of its story, and part of its darkness. The chamber seemed alive, every surface vibrating with a rhythm Mara could feel deep in her bones. The shadows weren't just darkness, they were aware, moving like sentient tendrils along the walls and floor. Some seemed to reach for her, curling and flickering, whispering in voices she couldn't quite place. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear and exhilaration as the man behind her, his presence magnetic and consuming, guided her further into the room. "Do they always respond like this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Only to those who have the courage to see," he said, brushing a loose strand of wet hair from her face. "And to those who are willing to surrender to them." Mara's breath caught. Surrender, the word carried weight, a dangerous promise that sent heat racing through her veins. She could feel his nearness, the warmth of his body, the subtle brush of his hands as he circled her like a predator assessing prey, not with menace, but with an intimate intensity that made her pulse spike. "What do you want from me?" she asked, though her voice wavered. The shadows around them swirled faster, as if sensing the tension between them, responding to the silent charge in the air. "I want you to see," he murmured, stepping closer until she could feel his breath on her ear. "To understand the tower. To feel its power, and your own." A shiver ran through her. Every instinct screamed both warning and invitation. She knew danger was near, but the pull was irresistible, as though the shadows themselves were drawing her toward him, toward something forbidden and intoxicating. He guided her toward a circle of light in the center of the chamber. Crystals embedded in the floor pulsed gently, bathing her in fractured rainbows that danced across her skin. Shadows writhed at the edges of the room, dark and fluid, as if testing her, daring her to step forward. Mara's heart pounded. She felt like she had crossed into another world, one ruled by desire, danger, and mystery. "Step into the light," he whispered. His hand brushed hers lightly as he gestured toward the center. "The shadows will follow you, but you must lead, not flee." Mara hesitated, then stepped forward, feeling the pulsing warmth of the crystals beneath her feet. The shadows flowed toward her, rippling and coiling like living smoke. She could feel their energy brushing against her skin, tingling, almost intoxicating. The air around her was thick with anticipation, a heady mix of fear and something far more primal. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. "Breathe," he murmured. "Let the tower guide you. Let it show you who you are." She did as he instructed, drawing a deep breath and closing her eyes. The shadows seemed to respond, wrapping around her, pressing gently, testing the edges of her courage. Mara felt a strange thrill, the kind that comes from standing on the edge of something unknown and dangerous. Then, without warning, the shadows shifted. One swept over her hand, slipping along her arm with a soft, almost intimate caress. Another brushed her shoulder, lingering for a fraction of a second that felt like eternity. She gasped, caught between fear and desire, and felt his hand cover hers, steadying her, grounding her in the storm. "You're ready," he whispered. "Do you feel it?" She nodded, her body tense and alive with sensation. "Yes," she breathed. I feel it." The shadows responded instantly, swirling faster, more deliberately, as if acknowledging her courage. They clung to her, flowing around her like a living cloak, drawing her further into the center of the room. The air pulsed with energy, vibrating with a rhythm that matched the racing of her heart. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. "The tower tests those who enter," he murmured. "It reveals desires, fears, and truths. The question is, can you handle what it shows you?" Mara's chest tightened with anticipation. She didn't know what lay ahead, didn't know what the tower intended to reveal. But she knew one thing with certainty: she could not turn away. The shadows had claimed her attention, the storm had claimed her senses, and the man beside her had claimed a part of her she hadn't even known existed. Lightning struck outside, illuminating the chamber in a blinding flash. For a moment, shadows and light intertwined, twisting and writhing like living things. Mara's body trembled, caught between exhilaration and fear, desire and the unknown. The tower had begun its work, and she was fully in its grip. And as the shadows danced around her, whispering secrets she could not yet understand, she realized that she was no longer merely a visitor. She was a participant, an accomplice, and perhaps something even deeper. The storm within the tower had merged with the storm inside her. The chamber seemed to pulse with life, each flicker of light and shadow creating a rhythm that Mara felt deep in her bones. She had begun to sense the tower's will, its awareness, as if the stones themselves were alive, observing, and responding to her every movement. The shadows around her were no longer just ephemeral darkness, they were deliberate, almost sentient, curling and twisting with intent. The man remained close, his presence grounding her even as the tower seemed to pull her into an unfamiliar world. His fingers brushed against hers again, light but purposeful, sending shivers through her entire body. She wanted to ask him who he truly was, what his connection to the tower might be, but every instinct told her to wait, to follow, to trust for now. "Look," he whispered, his voice low and seductive. "There is more you must see." He led her across the chamber, their hands occasionally brushing, a subtle spark igniting with each touch. Shadows shifted as they moved, revealing narrow passageways that Mara had not noticed before. Each corridor seemed darker than the last, curling into corners where light refused to linger. The air was heavy, scented with wet stone and something almost metallic, as if the storm itself had left its trace inside the tower. As they descended a spiraling staircase, the temperature dropped. Mara could see her breath curling in the air, and the shadows seemed to thicken, flowing along the walls like liquid darkness. The man's hand lingered at her lower back, guiding her, holding her in a firm but intimate grip that both comforted and ignited her senses. "They're drawn to you," he said softly, almost to himself. "The shadows, they recognize something within you. A hunger, a courage, a longing." Mara shivered, not entirely from the cold. His words struck her with unexpected intensity. "Hunger?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Longing? For what?" "For understanding," he replied, his lips close to her ear now. "For experience. For surrender to what lies beneath the ordinary." The descent ended in a vast subterranean chamber. Here, the shadows moved with uncanny fluidity, curling along the walls and floor like living smoke. In the center of the room stood a pedestal carved from black stone, upon which rested a small, ancient mirror. Its surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not just her image, but the swirling shadows that moved behind her in the dim light. "This," he said, gesturing to the mirror, "is the heart of the tower. It shows what is hidden in plain sight, what is denied in daylight. But it is not passive, it tests those who gaze upon it." Mara stepped closer, drawn despite the unease curling in her stomach. She looked into the mirror, and the reflection startled her. It wasn't just her face she saw, it was herself enmeshed in darkness, shadows crawling over her skin, wrapping around her like a second skin. And yet, beneath the shadows, there was a glimmer of something forbidden and intoxicating, desire, courage, and an unspoken longing she hadn't dared acknowledge. The man stepped behind her, his hands resting lightly on her hips. "You must not fear what you see," he murmured. "The mirror reveals truth, but truth can liberate as much as it can terrify." Mara swallowed hard, her pulse racing. The shadows in the chamber shifted, reacting to the tension between them. One brushed along her arm, another lingered near her neck, teasing and tantalizing in ways that made her shiver with anticipation. She felt as if the tower itself were alive, breathing, pressing in, testing her resolve. "What happens if I can't handle it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He leaned closer, his lips grazing the shell of her ear, warm and intoxicating. "Then the tower will adapt." "But I think you can. You feel it, don't you? The connection." Mara's breath hitched. Yes, she felt it. The pull of the shadows, the storm raging outside, and the heat of the man behind her, it was all fused together, wild and consuming. Her body was taut with tension, desire, and fear, but also exhilaration. She realized she had crossed a threshold, there was no turning back now. The shadows responded to her awareness, curling around her like smoke around fire, tracing the contours of her body without touching, teasing, warning, inviting. And in that charged silence, she understood something fundamental: the tower did not simply test the body, it tested the mind, the heart, and the soul. She let herself breathe, let herself feel, letting the shadows whisper to her, revealing fragments of truths she had never known she craved. And as she turned slightly to face the man, his eyes dark with intensity, she realized the danger wasn't just in the tower, it was in the exhilaration of surrendering to it, to him, and to the storm that now raged both outside and within. Mara had stepped into the shadows, and the shadows had claimed her. The chamber felt alive in a way Mara could no longer question. The shadows pulsed around her like dark water, rippling with her every breath, following her every movement. It was a strange, intoxicating rhythm, and she felt herself moving in tune with it, as though the tower itself had become a part of her body, her senses, her desires. The man remained close behind her, his hands brushing subtly against her arms, her waist, his presence a tether grounding her as the shadows reached hungrily toward her. His nearness was electric, sending currents of heat through her skin. Every nerve ending felt alive, every instinct heightened. Mara's mind was alert, yet her thoughts swirled with an urgent, unamiable longing. "You're learning," he murmured, his voice low and hypnotic. "The shadows respond to those who understand them. And you, Mara, are beginning to understand." "Understand what?" she asked, her voice trembling. She felt her pulse in her throat, her skin cling with the sensation of being observed, tested, and desired. "The power of surrender," he said, stepping closer until his chest pressed lightly against her back. "Not fear, not hesitation, only surrender. Only yielding to what is, without resisting." Mara's breath hitched. His words, soft as they were, carried a weight she couldn't resist. Around them, the shadows twisted in intricate patterns, dark ribbons flowing along the walls, sliding across the floor, reaching toward her like sentient fingers. And yet, there was no malice in them, only a dangerous, thrilling invitation. I don't know if I can," she whispered, feeling the tension between curiosity and caution coil tighter inside her. "You already can," he murmured, his lips brushing the side of her neck. "You already have. That is why they respond to you." A shiver ran through her. She could feel his warmth, the steady strength of him anchoring her, yet the shadows themselves pressed in like a living entity, teasing, testing, drawing her into a rhythm she hadn't known existed. Her fingers curled, and for the first time, she let herself move freely, letting the currents of the chamber guide her, the shadows tracing her form in intricate, intimate patterns. He whispered again, his voice both instruction and temptation. "Close your eyes. Feel the darkness. Let it move with you. Let it show you what you've never allowed yourself to feel." Mara obeyed. Her eyelids fell shut, and instantly, the darkness became more tangible. The shadows were no longer just shapes, they were sensations, brushing along her skin, swirling around her, coaxing reactions from her body she hadn't realized she could manifest. She gasped at the intimacy of it, her body responding to something intangible yet undeniable. The man's hands moved, guiding her subtly, pressing just enough to heighten awareness without controlling, teasing without overt dominance. Mara felt herself being drawn into a dance she hadn't known existed, a rhythm between shadow and flesh, between fear and desire, between restraint and surrender. A sudden flicker of lightning illuminated the room, and for a split second, Mara saw herself reflected in the heart of the tower. The image startled her, shadows coiled along her limbs, her skin gleaming faintly with a light that seemed borrowed from the storm. And standing behind her, almost part of the shadows themselves, was him, his eyes dark, intense, consuming. "You see now," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "The tower doesn't just test. It reveals. It exposes what you deny yourself, and what you crave." Mara's knees weakened. She pressed back into him, feeling the heat of his body, the proximity of his breath, the pulse of desire mingled with exhilaration. Around them, the shadows responded, twisting faster, moving closer, their presence almost tangible, almost intimate. A flash of lightning outside, followed by a roar of thunder, made the chamber shudder. Mara's heart mirrored the turbulence, a tempest of fear, fascination, and a desire she could no longer ignore. She realized then that she was no longer simply observing. She was participating, engaging, surrendering herself to the dark, beautiful chaos of the storm tower. "Are you ready?" he murmured, his hands now holding hers, their fingers interlaced. His gaze was fierce, hypnotic, demanding. Mara hesitated a heartbeat, then nodded, her body trembling with anticipation. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm ready." The shadows surged, curling around them both, moving as one entity. The chamber seemed to exhale, the storm outside synchronizing with the storm inside. Mara felt a wild exhilaration, a dangerous thrill, a sense that nothing would ever be the same again. And in that moment, she understood the truth of the tower, the shadows, and the man who had drawn her into its embrace. Surrender was not weakness, it was power, desire, and liberation all at once. The chamber seemed to hum with energy, the shadows now fully alive, responding to Mara's every movement as if they had merged with her very essence. She could feel the pulse of the tower in her veins, a deep, intoxicating rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. Each breath she drew seemed heavier, charged with anticipation, and the man beside her remained a steady, tantalizing presence, his dark eyes watching every subtle reaction with keen intensity. "You've embraced it," he murmured, his voice low, vibrating through the charged air. "The shadows recognize those who accept them. They will test you now, in ways you cannot yet imagine." Mara shivered, feeling both thrill and fear. The shadows shifted around them, curling and twisting, brushing against her skin in ways both electric and intimate. She sensed that their presence was no longer merely an external force, it was a reflection of her own hidden desires, her unspoken longings, now made tangible and alive. What will they do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will show you yourself," he replied. "Not the version you present to the world, but the version buried beneath caution, restraint, and fear. Only by confronting it will you gain the clarity you seek and the freedom you crave." Mara's breath caught. She had always been drawn to the edge of experiences she didn't fully understand, but now, standing in the center of the chamber with the shadows swirling around her, she realized that this was unlike anything she had imagined. It was dangerous, yes, but irresistible. Her pulse quickened as she felt the first tendrils of shadow brush her shoulders, tracing her spine in a way that made her shiver involuntarily. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers, guiding her forward into a pool of pale light emanating from the crystalline pedestal. The heart of the tower shimmered, reflecting not only her image but the shadows coiling around her, almost caressing, almost whispering promises she couldn't yet decipher. "Look into it," he said softly, his breath warm against her neck. "Let the tower show you. Do not resist." Mara did as he instructed. The mirror's surface shimmered, rippling like water, and the reflection staring back at her was, not entirely herself. The shadows moved over her reflection like silk, tracing her form, highlighting every curve, every line, every unacknowledged desire. She saw herself not as the cautious, reserved woman she had always believed herself to be, but as someone bold, hungry for sensation, unafraid to embrace danger and desire alike. A shiver ran through her, and she felt his hands on her waist, steadying, grounding, intensifying. "You see what I see," he murmured. "You feel what I feel. The tower doesn't lie." Mara's heart raced. She could no longer distinguish where the shadows ended and her own body began. Every touch, every whisper of movement against her skin heightened the tension within her, igniting a fire she hadn't realized had been simmering beneath her consciousness. She was both terrified and exhilarated, a blend of sensation that left her dizzy with anticipation. The shadows responded to her arousal, coiling tighter, pressing closer, their presence now almost intimate, teasing, almost sentient. Mara's breath quickened, her body tense, every nerve alive with the interplay of fear, desire, and the storm raging outside. He leaned close, his lips brushing the curve of her ear. "The tower will test you further," he murmured. "It will push boundaries, reveal secrets, demand surrender. And you will either rise or falter." "I'm ready," she whispered, though even she sensed the tremor in her voice. She had surrendered herself already, in more ways than she had realized, yet the tower's pull promised more intensity, more revelation, more danger. A flash of lightning outside illuminated the chamber, and for a moment, the shadows coiled into intricate patterns, almost like they were dancing in celebration. Mara felt herself lifted into a rhythm beyond comprehension, a delicate balance between control and abandon, fear and exhilaration. She was no longer merely an observer, she was part of the tower, part of the shadows, part of the storm itself. The man's hands traced the line of her spine, sending shivers down her body. "You feel the power," he whispered. "It's intoxicating, isn't it?" "Yes," she breathed, almost trembling. "I've never felt anything like this." "And this is only the beginning," he said, his lips brushing her ear. "The final test approaches. And only those willing to surrender fully, survive." Mara's pulse thundered in her chest, her senses on fire, every shadow, every brush of wind, every heartbeat of the storm coursing through her. She knew that the coming trial would demand everything: fear, desire, courage, and surrender. And yet, in that dangerous anticipation, she felt more alive than ever. The storm outside raged, but inside the storm tower, an even greater storm had taken hold, one that threatened to consume her completely. And Mara realized with a thrill she couldn't deny, she was ready to face it, to embrace it, to surrender, fully. The storm outside had grown into a tempest of almost apocalyptic intensity, rain lashing the ancient stones, wind shrieking like a living creature. Inside, Mara felt the storm mirrored in her own chest, every beat of her heart a drum in perfect sync with the pulsing energy of the tower. She stood at the center of the chamber, the heart of the tower shimmering before her, the shadows coiling and writhing around her like living smoke. The man was close, his presence a tether she could neither resist nor escape. "This is it," he murmured, his voice low, intimate, carrying both warning and promise. "The final trial. Everything the tower has shown you, it culminates here. Only those willing to surrender fully can endure it and emerge changed." Mara's pulse thundered, but she nodded, steeling herself. She had followed the shadows, had let them guide her, had surrendered to the storm, the tower, and the man who had awakened something deep within her. She was ready. The shadows surged suddenly, moving faster, wrapping around her in tight coils that pressed against her like living fingers. They were no longer merely teasing or testing, they demanded response, demanded submission, demanded recognition of the power she held inside herself. Mara gasped, her body trembling under the intensity, every nerve alight with sensation. "Do not fight them," the man whispered, his lips brushing her ear. "Let them flow through you. Let them become part of you." Mara closed her eyes, letting the shadows envelop her fully. She felt their energy seeping into her, mingling with her own desires, her own strength. Fear and exhilaration intertwined, and she realized she had never felt so alive, so exposed, so powerful. The tower was no longer an external force, it was a part of her, and she was a part of it. Lightning illuminated the chamber, and in that brilliant flash, the shadows twisted into shapes she had never imagined. Faces, bodies, desires, manifestations of the deepest longings, the hidden fears, the truths she had never acknowledged danced across the walls and floor. Mara's breath caught. She had seen glimpses of herself before, but now the mirror of the tower reflected the totality of who she was: fearless, hungry, alive, and unafraid to confront the darkness within. The man's hands moved along her arms and back, grounding her yet adding to the electric tension. "You are ready," he murmured. "Now claim it. Claim yourself. Claim this power. The shadows cannot possess you, they only amplify what already exists within." Mara felt a surge of energy that seemed to emanate from the very floor beneath her feet. The shadows reacted, swirling faster, pulling her into a spiral of sensation, a dance of light and dark that left her dizzy, breathless, and trembling. Her fear dissolved into exhilaration, her hesitation into desire, and every heartbeat became a rhythm of surrender and power entwined. "Let go," he whispered. "Trust yourself. Trust the tower. Trust me." And she did. Mara surrendered fully, not in weakness, but in strength. She let the shadows flow over her, around her, through her. She became part of the storm, part of the tower, part of the living, breathing darkness that thrummed with life. The tension, the fear, the longing all merged into a singular, electrifying awareness that left her quivering, triumphant, and alive in ways she had never known. The shadows receded gradually, leaving her standing in the center of the chamber, chest heaving, skin tingling, and heart racing. The storm outside seemed to echo the calm after a climactic crescendo, a windswept silence filled with anticipation and awe. The man stepped close, his gaze fierce, dark, and intimate. "You endured," he murmured. "You embraced the shadows, and they have acknowledged you. You are no longer a visitor, you are part of the storm tower itself." Mara met his eyes, feeling the electricity between them still crackling, yet tempered now with something profound: mutual recognition, a shared understanding of the dangerous, exhilarating dance they had both been part of. I feel it," she whispered. "I've changed. I can feel it, inside me." "Yes," he replied, his hands brushing hers. "The tower reveals, the shadows guide, and desire awakens. You are stronger, more alive, and free." Mara's gaze drifted around the chamber, the shadows now calm, almost reverent, as if they recognized her transformation. She felt a thrill of triumph, of liberation, of intimate power, knowing that the storm tower had tested her, pushed her, and ultimately awakened a part of her she had never dared to explore. Outside, lightning flashed one last time, illuminating the ancient stones in a silver brilliance. Inside, Mara and the man stood together, surrounded by quiet shadows, the storm's echo fading, and a sense of infinite possibility stretching before them. The tower had revealed its secrets, tested its chosen, and left her forever changed. And Mara knew, with a thrill that made her shiver, that the shadows would always be with her, a reminder of desire, danger, and the intoxicating power of surrender. She smiled, a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and triumph, and took a deep breath, knowing she had claimed the storm and herself.